from the Dragons. Hunt goes short side. W and run. Now kicks over the top. It'll come down 10 out. Collins was there. Play on. Still the last tackle. Big numbers left. Sloan decides to kick. Here come the Dragons. Here come the Dragons. Oh my goodness. Who writes these scripts? Rugby league. You beautiful thing.
G'day coaches, it's SuperCoach Krupt here for another episode. I'd just like to start off with a huge thank you. Thank you to all the people that jumped on my YouTube and Spotify and even my Twitter page, particularly those that listened to the first Structure and Strategy podcast and gave me some fantastic feedback and how much they loved it and how it's just a slightly different look and angle than what any other content creators are doing out there. And not just going through player by players and spitting out statistics and numbers at you, but actually talking about the nuts and bolts of how to structure a team. So based off that, I've actually been doing a second one today. I've had a lot of people write to me and asking for another one and to cover a few different topics. So I'll be doing that today and going through some Twitter questions that people have sent through to me, and we're going to be discussing structure, strategy, trades. I'm going to go through some pretty unpopular opinions that I disagree with, and I'm going to go and explain a little bit about why I disagree with those, that some content creators and some coaches out there are talking about that I actually think potentially might I have a different view on. But firstly, if you're not following me on Twitter, jump on over to my Twitter, give us a like. Also on YouTube, this is a video podcast, so if you are listening on Spotify, please jump over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel because I will be showing some content up on the screen today, all things going to plan. All right, so guys, first of all, just want to touch on a couple of things. This podcast, first of all, will be happening on a semi-regular basis, not necessarily just strategy and structure, but I don't, in the preseason anyway, I won't be producing regular videos or YouTube content or Spotify content. Most of my regular commentary you can find on Twitter that I produce almost daily. However, these podcasts, when I have something important to say, or when I feel there's something strategy-wise or something that you need to know in order to assist you in getting the best results for your team, I absolutely will post it on here, and you'll find a new video will pop up on YouTube or Spotify. So definitely subscribe to those channels because that's how you'll get an alert to know that there is a new video that Coach Krupt has put up. And like I say, I just try to get to the nuts and bolts of what's actually important. So who is Coach Krupt? For those that didn't tune into the first video, who am I? Well, Coach Krupt, I am a strategy game player. I've competed in international strategy games, for example, at the World Series of Poker. I've played in Vegas several times at the World Series. I was there for the 50th anniversary of the World Series over in Vegas. I love my poker and I love strategy games, and I'm a real thinker and analyzer of any strategy games that I'm involved with. I've also been on Survivor here in Australia early on in the first few seasons. But with regards to SuperCoach, a lot of people would have come to know me through my last season where I was tweeting out a lot about the results as we were going through. So last season, I got off to an okay start on round one, but then very quickly, based on the structure of my team, progressed up the ranks very quickly. So with the structure of my team, we actually jumped into the top 1,000 fairly quickly, and then the top 100 pretty quickly after that. And I'll just pull up now for me so I can explain to you exactly where I placed in those. But basically, with regards to the placings, I was top 20 by about the end of the last major buy, and ended up being about 17th place and floating around that area for the last weeks of the season up until the final couple of rounds where I ran out of trades and just dropped back a few spots down to 170th or 178th, I think I was. So, but really, the key to why I believe I was so successful last season, and what is a very different SuperCoach season than what we've experienced for years before that. And what I mean by it's a very different SuperCoach season, strategically speaking, you need to make some adjustments, I believe. So some of those people, experts and coaches that have been playing for a while haven't quite, I believe, made the shift strategically to be able to change to the way the game is now. So the game, I believe, is a bit more like poker. It's very strategic. You need to know your numbers, but you also need to make moves at the right times. Sometimes you've got to hold off and not make moves. Sometimes you absolutely need to go balls to the wall and make trades, boosts, everything. You need to absolutely go for it. And there are certain times in the season and certain moments in that season that you definitely need to focus on those. But I definitely believe there's a fair few people out there, experts, like I say, that haven't quite made that switch. This is potentially why they also didn't have a great season last year, because they're still thinking and playing it like as if it was for the years gone by where there wasn't weekly buys. And when there wasn't weekly buys, you didn't have to really manage your way through the season as such. You could slowly approach the season and slowly build your value and your team and your squad. And then by the buys, origin buys, and then end of the season, you absolutely could come home with a wet sail and generally, if you had done a good job in the first half of the season, finish off super strong and make a challenge for the title. I don't believe that this is the case from what I learned last year looking at it. I don't believe that's the case. I believe you actually have to change the way you structure your team and the way you plan with your buys. And I'm going to discuss buys later on in this podcast. I'm going to discuss buys, some really unpopular opinions, but I'm going to touch on that. I won't do it right now because we'll go into detail about that later on. But definitely when you're thinking of your strategies towards this, all I'll ask of you is just be open-minded. Be open-minded to this podcast that potentially I'm going to change and challenge you with regards to how you think about your team, how you think about SuperCoach. You've got to try to at least look at it objectively that this is a different type of SuperCoach now that we're faced with these weekly buys. Now, some people, and I'll discuss this later too, will just say to you that weekly buys aren't that important. It's just one round. It's just one team. Unpopular opinion, I disagree completely. I disagree with that statement 110%. And I'll explain to you why later on as well. So let's get into it. When you're structuring your preseason team, I did touch on this on my Twitter, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. When you're just structuring your preseason team, you're actually structuring two teams, not one. So yes, you've got 25 players and you'd call that one team, but within that one team early on in preseason, you're actually structuring two teams. What do I mean by that? Well, every week you need to select 13 players and 4 reserves. So that's 17 players. That's team number one, is just 17 players that you're going to put on the field and all their points will count. But there's more to it than that. There's also another 8 players. Those 8 players is player number 18 through to player number 25. Now those players, particularly player 18, 19, and I would say even for some coaches, player 20, are super important. So when you're focusing on creating a team, I would say to you, forget about positions at the moment, forget about roles, positions, and who you're choosing, but focus more on the numbers. Focus on averages. Now, forget what SuperCoach, the app or the website says that their projected score is, because we all know that's pretty irrelevant. Some players in there right now, some guns, have really low scores based on the fact that they didn't play much last year. So you've really got to just put that to the side. But you should be able to create your own averages. So if you were to write a list of your 1 to 17 and what you believe the likely, don't overestimate it, but don't dramatically underestimate it either. But write out your averages. What do you think these players will score? Obviously, you don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, but you definitely could make some educated guesses there. So make some educated guesses around your 1 to 17, what you think they will actually score. On average, not just for round 1, but an average for the first 4 or 5 rounds, maybe even 6 or 7 rounds, what you think would be their average. Now you've got access to lots of data around that for previous seasons, so you should be able to make some pretty educated guesses. But forget about positions. I'd even forget about names. You're just looking at numbers. What is that? Because what you want to create is the highest scoring or averaging top 17 players that you can put onto the field, irrelevant of their position. Now, why is that important? It's super important because we've all seen lately, particularly, and I'm going to discuss this later on as well, and I'll mention it now a little bit, and that's about hookers. So with hookers, there's a lot of people out there say you can't do a double cheapy hooker strategy. Now, whilst, again, I'll go into this later on, whether I agree or disagree with that strategy, but whilst I do have a point, I also say just be a bit open-minded to the fact that if you look at this differently and look at this as just a mathematics equation and go, well, 1 to 17 is just a whole bunch of numbers on a page. What I need to do is grab the averages that are the highest and throw those 17 people onto the field, no matter what position they're in. So for most people, if I said to you, what is your player 16 and player 17? So in other words, what are your 2 lowest scoring players that you have in your team right now? Have a think about it. What are they? Who are they? What position are they in? I can almost guarantee you, for most coaches out there anyway, that your player 16 and player 17 that you'll be counting on at the moment in your team for round 1 would probably be a center. Probably be a $250, maybe even lower, maybe a $300,000 center. That's okay. But what do you realistically expect based on playing this game for a few years that those cheap centres are going to achieve for you? Like a Bostock, maybe even a Burbo. What do you think these guys are, or Iro if he happens to get a run? What do you think these guys are going to score for you? Do we estimate, could we have seen this in history, that 20, 30 points? Sometimes they might have a high game, but can you really rely on that? Can you rely on that? And this is about being realistic with your numbers. So if we're going to rely on them getting a 20 or a 30 points and they're in your 17, therefore your bottom two are centres and they're 20 or 30, and they're going to get you a 20 or 30 average for the first 6, 7 rounds. My challenge to you is, what if your player 16 or 17 wasn't a centre wing? What if your player 16 or 17, hypothetically, was a hooker? Yes, Harry Grant will probably be the number one hooker at the end of the season, but what if you didn't have that? Let's just say you did run a double cheapy hooker strategy, and let's say that was Brendan Hands or Lussick or whoever it might be up there as player number 17. Yes, you're not running a Harry Grant. Understand that, and he averages around that 75 mark compared to, say, a 45 mark that Hands has been proven to achieve on averages based on 80-minute games. And in fact, he's achieved higher than that, but I'll go into that a little bit later as well, what Hands is, when we discuss double cheapy hooker strategies and whether that's a good thing or not. But player 17, let's just hypothetically say you choose that to be a hooker. So rather than a 20 to 30 point averaging centre wings, you now potentially got a 40, 45 averaging hooker. But irrelevant of positions, your 17th player or 16th player now is got about a 10 to 20 point average jump on other teams that are running a cheap hooker. A cheap centre or two cheap centre wings. So I just want you to think about that for a little bit. It doesn't take away positions, take away names. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is the numbers. So looking at the numbers and going, how do I get the best 17 averaging scores onto the field for round one? Now, the player 18 to 25 are also is team number 2. Now, that's really important as well, particularly for building depth and value in your team. 18 to 25 is super important that they make money. You ideally want most of those 18 to 25 team, your second team of 18 to 25, on the field. They don't necessarily all have to start. Ideally, they do, but they need to at least be on the field or on the bench for their teams. So you might have a cheap second rower, for example, that might be coming off the bench, or not second row, front row forward, potentially that might be coming off the bench. Look, that's going to happen. But you should have most of your 18 to 25 number players actually on the field, and ideally no nuffs at the start. You will get your nuffs for your looping and so forth just naturally through one team having a bye every round. So you should have someone there that you'll be able to loop anyway. So you don't need to start off with nuffs. What you do need to do is build value in your team as quickly as you possibly can. Quicker than you ever have done. Quicker than you've done for the years gone by if you've been playing SuperCoach for a while, because now we need to build value in our teams and we need to build squad depth for player 18 and 19 need to get strong as we can get those guys as quick as we can get them. Why? Because we're having weekly buys. Yes, some of the best content creators out there will tell you weekly buys don't matter. It's not that important. It's one round. It's only one team. But that's not actually true, right? It isn't one round. It isn't one team. Because after this one round and this one team, guess what? Next week, there's another one round, another one team. But unfortunately, coaches don't just have necessarily one player. Look at Penrith, a fairly early buy. Most people are going to have a Taylor in May and potentially a Nathan Cleary or hopefully not a Sonny Luke. But they'll have some players out there that going to have coaches out there that are going to have more than one person for some of these buys. Melbourne Storm will be another one when they have their buy. Potentially even Cronulla, definitely Titans, Dolphins. There's a fair few early buys where some of these coaches are going to have multiple people on the buy. So it isn't going to be one team, one person. It's potentially going to be more than that. And then next week, it'll be the same thing again. So if you have one person on a buy every single week from your team, from round 1 through to round 7 or 8, you are playing with less of a salary cap than my team. And then lots of other coaches that actually listen to this podcast. So, and potentially you're going to be playing with 2 less players, 2 less guns possibly, than what other coaches are playing for. That is going to set you back. You're playing with a smaller salary cap than those that have strategically built their team. So we need to look at this as slightly different. Now, you won't be able to avoid, let me just make this clear, you won't be able to avoid every single player on a buy. That's just impossible for the early rounds. You're going to have some in there, like a Nico Hines or a Nathan Cleary, or you might have a JMK or a Harry Grant. Some of these early buy teams, you're going to have some of them in there, and that's okay. All I'm saying is don't load up on too many of these early buy players. Make it a very strong consideration when you're building your team about trying to maximize your salary cap. You want most of your salary cap on the field playing, particularly when it comes to your guns and your high value players, particularly your team number 1, that 1 to 17 I spoke about. You want them on the field. They need to be scoring points for you because you paid the most for them. They ate into your salary cap. You don't really want them on the bench. So have a think about that when you're building your preseason team and you're structuring it together. 18 and 19 are really, really important. We get those guys upgraded as soon as we can. Why? Because those early buys kick in, we are relying on 18 and 19, player number 18, player number 19. So right now, if you look at your team, you should be able to work out who player 18 and 19 is likely going to be. It might be a Brayley up there in the hooker position. It could be your mid to weaker 5'8" position, possibly. You need to have a look at that as well. What we want to do is get those people upgraded as soon as we can. So we've got a strong 17 and we've got strong 1 to 2 reserves, 18, 19 position, so that we can get them on the field in those as soon as we can when one player is missing due to a bye. Now, for some people, they might have already thought of that, but I can guarantee for a lot of coaches, they lose sight of that fact. So just keep that in mind when you're building and structuring your preseason team. Also, when the season kicks off, it's really important that we all work together, and especially everyone that listens to this podcast. I tell you right now, what I want is for every single person listening to this podcast to have a cracking season. Because I'll tell you now, when I was coming top 1,000, top 100, top 20, 17th, it is way more fun being up the top, up the pointy end of the competition, and absolutely flying with a chance of winning the $50,000 than what it is being down the middle to bottom of the ladder, hoping that your slowly approach might just get you up to the top 1,000 or 2,000 at the end of the season. It's way more fun when you're actually right up the top. So how to do that, you've got to be a bit more strategic at the start, as well as the first 7 or 8 rounds. We've really got some things that we need to achieve. And I'm going to be discussing on podcasts as well as on my Twitter, different strategies once this season kicks off about how we actually make sure we're making those big jumps. Not too different to what I did last year as well. How do we make those big jumps early? And there's going to be a few things that we're going to need to focus on, particularly in structuring our teams, making some moves, how we use our trades and our boosts, and also buy planning when that kicks in. So again, like and subscribe this page, like and subscribe me on YouTube and Spotify so that you get my podcasts as they drop. You get those notifications. In saying all that, you still have to save money somewhere on your team. So we can't have guns everywhere. There's no coach out there that's going to have guns throughout the whole team. So where do we save the money? That's a really important part to consider. If you're going to go expensive with Harry Grant up top and you're going to have, let's say, Nathan Cleary, Nico Hines, Dylan Brown, 2 gun fullbacks, you're going to have to make sacrifices. You can create a team like that. Absolutely. I've got several. I've tried with that to see what it does. But what it means, though, is you're left with about $350,000-ish per player left throughout the rest of the team to fill up all those spots. So you're going to have weak front rows, you're going to have weak second rows, you might have 1 or 2 mids. It's very hard to get a balanced squad that achieves all the goals we're wanting to achieve in a preseason squad, strategically speaking, if you're going to put all those guns in. So whilst I'm a content creator and there's so many of us out there, I would just say be careful with who you listen to on some of these content creators, because if you're listening to lots of them, you're going to hear lots of different advice and lots of different coaches sending in teams, and you're going to see people go, oh, you have to have a gun hooker, and you have to have another podcast or creator might say you have to have Nico Hines and Nathan Cleary, and you must have 2 gun fullbacks, and you must. So if you listen to multiple podcasts, you're going to get confused. It's going to be confusing. I listen to stacks of podcasts. I listen to nearly all of them, and I love it. I love all of them out there. Some great content creators out there, especially when it comes to analyzing statistics of players. But strategically speaking, I would like to think that this podcast is actually one of the best out there for strategy when it comes to SuperCoach. But don't get confused. You can overthink and plan your team. Especially preseason, you can overthink it. And if you're looking at all these other creators and pages, what can happen is you think, okay, I've got to have, that one told me I have to have a gun, at least 1 gun hooker, and I have to have 2 gun halves, as another podcast told me. And I then listened to another one, and they told me you need at least 1 gun center and then build some cheapies around it. But if you're listening to so many different pages, you can't do what all of them are saying because they're all individual. So my point is, you have to save money somewhere. Whether that's 5'8", halfback, and those high value positions and high ceiling positions, hooker, fullbacks, you've got to choose a spot. What I look for particularly is players that have got increased minutes or have had an injury-affected season last season, players that are going to be making not just cash, but also should be coming in at an increased average based on what they're priced at last year. Because the gap between them and the players valued above them will be smaller. I'll pay less for them because they're coming in at a reduced amount of money, because they're discounted based on not playing enough games or injury-affected seasons, or they've moved to another club now, or even within their current club where they've got an increased minute role. That means we're going to get a better average from them and more value from them. But also it means the gap between them and the gun above them potentially is smaller. And Hooker is a good example of that. If Hands, and it's a big if, but if Hands or Lussick can come out and average what they averaged last season and 80-minute games, the gap between them and Harry Grant, the top-ranging hooker, who absolutely is the goal to get, but the average there, if they can come out, the difference there, if they can come out and average what they averaged last season in 80-minute games, is about 30 points. Now, 30 points is a lot of points every single week to be giving up. However, it's also over $400,000 in difference between a Hands and a Harry Grant. Now, with that $400,000, my question to you is, can you not make up that difference of points elsewhere in your team? I believe you absolutely can, and you can make up way more than 30 points with that $400,000 if you spend it wisely in the right positions as well. So based on that, though, I believe that you can do that. And I'm going to get to talking about double chippy hookers later on, so I won't go into too much detail right now, but just consider that when you're building your team. You do need to save money, and you do also want to have, I believe, those people that can hurt you. So last season, even though I got off to a cracking start and placed extremely high and was running top 20 overall for a long period of the season, I also didn't start with Nico Hines when he came back from injury last season. So when he came back from injury, I wanted to wait for one round just to see how he would go before I picked him up into my team, just to see what he looked like, get a bit of a read on him. Unfortunately, we all know what happened in that first round that he came back. He went absolutely ballistic and smashed all the coaches out there, including myself, that didn't have him. Because it didn't just hurt that he scored high. A lot of coaches had the VC on him or captain on him and got double points. So it hurt us double the amount. And it was terrifying because it was a huge kick in the guts, because it required now a lot more work to chase those guys down in the leaderboard that actually started with Hines for his first game back and took that risk. And that risk paid off. So we do need to, ideally, I believe, start with the guys that can hurt you. If you can afford to, if you can structure a team around that, start with the guys that can hurt you. Now, there's a few of them out there. Obviously, you've got people like Ponga, and you've got Hines and Cleary, and all these guys that can actually really sting you if they go nuts and put a 150 plus score, 140 plus score on, and people are captaining them. There are many ways to structure a team. So let's just clear this up as well. This is a good point. We need to identify this. There are many ways to structure a team. What I'm discussing today, and what I discussed in my first strategy podcast, is not the only way to structure a team. So it's really, really important we understand that. It's not the only way. There's many ways you can structure a team. I've seen heaps of different types of teams sent my way for me to give some advice on and help with. And some of them are very different than others. Look, there is a common theme there seems to be a very common template of a team that I'm seeing going around from content creators, because they're talking up a lot of players or certain players, and then everyone jumps on them, and a lot of the teams are starting to look a little bit similar. Part of the reason also why on this podcast and the preseason, I won't be doing a team reveal of my own. I just want everyone I'll give you help and tips around what type of players to look for and how to structure teams, but I want you to make your own choices. Go off your own gut feel. I don't want to give you a team of mine that then you go and copy, and we all have similar teams, but also I don't want you just to go off what my gut feels are and what my statistic reads are on certain players. I don't necessarily have all the right answers here. I could be completely wrong. So I want you to make your own decisions. You're better making mistakes off your own decisions than just copying and going off what another podcaster or content creator or other coaches you're seeing post their teams are doing. Make your own decisions. So I won't be doing any team reveals like that at the start of the season, but I definitely will be helping you with what players to choose or how to structure your teams. So we do need to save money in our teams. You ideally want to, when you do save money in a particular position, you want to be choosing a player with a higher upside, someone that, like I said, that was injury affected or potentially is only playing more minutes, so that the gap between them and the gun above them is less than what it looks like on paper, because they're priced at a lower amount due to discounts. All right. Let's get into some unpopular opinions. Now, This will fly in the face of what a lot of people are hearing and seeing out there. Some of these things you will agree with, some you'll disagree with, and that's okay. I'm open to people having different ideas and so forth, but I have my own ideas too, especially when it comes to strategy and how to look and analyze a situation or a game to come out with ideally the most optimal way of playing it and the best outcomes. So some people, let's start off with, and I mentioned this before, some people out there in the SuperCoach world are saying, don't worry early about those early round buys. There's only one game. You can get through one round. Well, I've already touched on that earlier, so I won't go over it again, but we know my feelings on that. I disagree wholeheartedly with that comment or that statement. You absolutely do need to worry about it, and you do need to be concerned about building depth quickly. Later on in the season, way less important, these weekly buys. Early in the season, very, very important. This is not the SuperCoach we've all played for years and years and years. It's a very different strategic game right now. So just change your mindset. I would challenge you to change your mindset, be open-minded about it, and have a little bit of a play with that. Okay, that's unpopular opinion number one. I disagree with that comment. Another opinion out there in the SuperCoach world is that you must slowly build your team, save trades early, and build depth and value in your team so you can come home strong at the end. That's a really popular opinion out there. Again, unpopular opinion. Coach Krupp disagrees with that one as well. I do believe there's a place for it. Don't get me wrong. I actually believe that that is a correct strategy for some players because that suits their way they like to play the game and how they approach strategy, just taking their time, working things out, and then slowly building into it. I just don't think it's the optimal strategy personally, not in this type of SuperCoach game that we're dealing with right now. So what do I think is the most optimal strategy? I actually think it is the opposite to that. I think trading hard, using your trades early, building depth in your team, value in your team as soon as you possibly can is really important. So you're playing with the maximum amount of your salary cap, not with 90, 80% of it because you are slowly saving trades. You need to get your high value players on the field and you need your player 18 and 19, potentially even 20, to be super strong. Players that you absolutely don't mind throwing on there to cover the one or two guys you've got in a weekly buy early in the season. It's really important. So let's discuss that then. Let's discuss about, actually, no, we'll come into that later. We'll discuss the trading a little bit later on and how hard to go on those trades. And I'm not just going to give you statements. I'm actually going to show you a little bit of proof around trading hard. I'll come back to that. Another unpopular opinion, and I haven't heard this lately, but I definitely heard it a little bit earlier. I'll go back a month or so ago, and that is you can't afford to have a gun at front row forward. You definitely shouldn't have one. They don't hurt you. Front row forward guns never hurt you. Well, I agree and disagree with that comment. I do believe you can have a gun in front row forward. Do I believe you absolutely should? Nah, probably not absolutely should, but I agree. I'm not going to say to people you should not have a gun in front row forward. You absolutely can, and there's value to that. Saving trades, consistent scorers in front row forward. Yes, they don't have the ceiling as some of the other positions, 100%. But I started, for example, last year with Payne Haas. Now, he was awesome. Other people started with people like Christian Welsh and Pele and Urukamano and all those kind of guys, hoping that they could save some money up there. But what happened with Christian Welsh, let's touch on him, his value never really changed the whole entire season. So you never, ever really made enough money. I think 50,000 might have been the highest that he ever went up in the season. But that's not enough to go from him to Payne Haas. So you're stuck with a plotter, putting out plotter kind of scores in SuperCoach, that is. Good player in real life, but in SuperCoach we're talking here. They can't really get you, elevate your team or your value to that next level to get a gun in at minimal cost changeover. So what happens is you need to find that money elsewhere. But ideally speaking, what we really want is either to have someone, and front row forward is hard to make significant value from. It's not a position where generally we find our money makers, typically speaking, like big money makers. It's not like it's a Hopgood or Cartwright from last season in our second row forwards who actually did make huge value. Front row forward is a little bit different. So Payne Haas, for example, is a great way of just stabilizing that. And there's other people as well you could put in there. He's not just the only one I'm promoting here. As I said before, I'm not really here to promote particular players' names and tell you who to choose. But you won't hear me say don't put a gun into front row forward. Absolutely can if that's the structure of your team that you want to run with. But if you are going to choose someone that's a mid, try and choose someone that is underpriced due to those reasons I said before. Injury affected, change in role, teams, minutes, all those kind of things that you should hopefully get a discount or potentially a price under what they should average this season based on more minutes or an increased role in their team. Or moving to a slightly different position in the team where they should see more ball or become now the focal point of that team. So that's an unpopular opinion about front row forwards. And I've kind of touched on it before, but you'll hear a lot of people, coaches out there and content creators saying you absolutely shouldn't do a double hooker cheapie combo. I disagree as well. Unpopular opinion, but I disagree. And I will go into explaining a little bit later why I disagree with that for. But in a nutshell, you need to save money somewhere in your team. And it just happens to be that in hooker, we may, and it's a big may or might, and there's a lot of risk attached to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here advocating that it's without risk. But we may be able to pick up an 80-minute Parramatta hooker who is going to be undervalued and underpriced, who instantly you'll be able to make a bit of money on based on where they're priced at. If it's, say, a Lussick and even a Brayley as well, potentially. So we're getting someone that potentially is priced lower than what they have averaged last season and what they can average in 80-minute games. Now, forget Brayley. I'm talking about the 80-minute Parramatta hookers, not Brayley, because we know that he's going to be doing a bit of job sharing potentially. So his minutes may well be reduced at the start of the season and then build into it. But I'm talking about, but you won't be playing Brayley. He'll be potentially your reserve hooker who hopefully will not be your player number 14, 15, 16, 17, and hopefully not even 18, so that you're not even having to touch Bradley. He's just sitting there, slow burning away, making you some money, hopefully, over the period. No, I was going to say no different to a Sonny Luke, but Sonny Luke was a very different story. He never made us money full stop the whole season, but I believe Bradley will at some point. He will grow in value. But we're talking about the number one hooker, well, the number one position hooker in your team, which may be, hypothetically, double cheapy strategy in hooker, may well be Hands or Lussick, possibly. So they potentially are, well, not potentially, they are definitely priced, or Lussick is at a lower price point. But in the 80-minute games, both of them are underpriced to what they have averaged in the 80 minutes. And like I said earlier on, there's about a 30-point difference between them and Harry Grant. Now, it's not without risk to do that strategy, but it is the ideal type of person to put into that position to save money. Someone that is underpriced, where the actual gap, not on SuperCoach website explaining to you where their price is and what their average, or what average they're priced at, because the average that they're priced at is actually lower than what the actual average was. So if you look at what they actually did average over the last 8 seasons, 80-minute games, I'll bring that up right now. So excuse me one moment while I bring some of this information up. All right, let's just, sorry about this, just one moment. We're just trying to find that information for you. All right, so Hands. Hands had 5 80-minute games in last season, in 2023, for a 56 average. Lussick, 3 80-minute games in 2023 for a 48 average. I'm not saying Hands can keep a 56 average, but let's just say you take 10, 15 points off that even, 16 points, and drop him down to a 45 average. He's only about 30 to 35 points below what Grant is, but you're getting him at a discounted price, $342,000. Lussick's the same at $313,000. You're getting them at a discounted price based on what they've averaged in 80-minute games. So instantly, the actual gap between him and, say, a premium hooker is significantly smaller than what it looks like on SuperCoach. And then you also will pick up $400,000 you can spend throughout your team to make up that 30, 35 point average and some. I would like to think you can get somewhere between 50 to 60 point gain in that money. So you actually get a 20 to 30 point gain yourself over and above what you looks like you're going to be losing by going not going a Grant option. I'm not here to say you must go double chippy hooker. This podcast is about is just challenging your thoughts a little bit. I'm more open-minded than what most are about strategy when it comes to strategy. I believe there's way more than one way to play this game. And so those people out there saying you can't do a double chippy hooker strategy, I just say have a little think of it, have a play with it, and challenge the way you see this game. Someone needs to be your player 16 and player 17 in your team. It could be a hooker if that's the way you want to structure your team. If you want to know whether I'm going that way, I don't actually know at this moment. I've got a few different teams, some with double chippy hookers, some without, some running a Grant, some running a JMK, for example. And I've even got some running a Robson. So there's a few different ways I could structure my team. And it just depends on how the rest of the team looks. But there's a lot of other gun players we want to get into our teams. And you have to save money somewhere. So if you can save money where you've got an undervalued, a player who's averaging more than what they're priced at in a position that narrows the gap between them and the gun that you really want, then you're going to A, make money off that player, B, you're going to be not significantly hurt as much by the average, and C, you're going to save so much money you can spend it elsewhere in your team to increase the value of your team elsewhere and the point scoring average of your team elsewhere. Just consider it. I'm not saying to do it. I'm not saying Coach K is going to do it. I might, but I may not as well. It just depends on Teamless Tuesday, trials, a whole lot of things are going to change between now and then. But I'm not ruling it out. And I definitely wouldn't say to people, don't do a front row forward. You can't do double chippy hookers. You can't do this. You can't do that. You absolutely can do all those things, I believe. And you definitely should consider it, at least. But it won't be for everyone. Some people will want to just go, no, I have to have that security of a hooker, and that's okay. Go get Grant, go get JMK, go and get an established hooker, and they will do awesome for you. And you won't have to worry about that hooker position again, because the hooker, doing a double chippy hooker, isn't without risk. There is every chance that hands might start, and then 3 weeks later, it's Lussick. And then another 2 weeks later, they decide, no, we need to put a bench hooker on there as well. So now we've got two hookers on the field. And it absolutely could cause a bit of havoc in your team. Or Brayley potentially continues to job share and doesn't increase his minutes. So there's risk, absolute risk. And they definitely won't have the ceiling of someone like a JMK or particularly a Grant will have. So it is not without risk. But if you want to spread the value in your team, you're going to have to take a few little risks throughout your team. For example, some people are choosing 5'8". Now, before the Jaden Campbell news coming out that he's not really training with the team and he might not even be there for round one due to injury, a lot of people I saw had a Campbell as a starting hooker and a Weeks potentially, or a cheap hooker, cheap 5'8" as their second 5'8". Is that not the same as what I'm discussing here with you with regards to hooker? Choosing someone, it's a mid 5'8", like a Jaden Campbell with upside or with value to be made, well, so is the hooker position. You could go a Dylan Brown in your 5'8", or you could go a Harry Grant or JMK in your hooker, or you can drop down to a mid with value and with who's undervalued, like a Jaden Campbell if he was playing, or potentially with a Parramatta hooker and gain that money, gain that value in your team, and also minimize the variance in average based on them being priced under what they actually did average in their 80-minute games last season. Both aren't without risk. There is no reason to think that for those people out there that say you can't do double chippy hooker, but they were looking at a Campbell and a cheap 5'8", it's no different. What if Campbell doesn't work at fullback? What if the coach goes, oh, made a mistake there. Desi Hasler, who's known to do some crazy things, goes, no, I want to bring Brimson back in. And Brimson can go there and Jaden Campbell can go to the bench. Or worse still, off the team. Like, there's risk there as well. There's risk no matter what decision you make, but you do need to save money. I'm just challenging it a little bit and saying, think about it. There are many ways where you can save money, but just find someone, if you are going to do it in a certain position, that is undervalued, who will minimize the gap between them and the player above them. Hooker is 1, 5'8", potentially as well. But you need to find a structure that you're comfortable with, most definitely. All right, so that explains a little bit about the double chippy hooker strategy. Let's talk about trading. I've seen some content out there and some people talking about trades, and it gets mentioned all the time about trading. You should always try to save trades at the start of the season. You definitely don't trade in the first round that's available to you to trade, which is prior to round 2. Obviously, in the preseason, we can trade as much as we want. Also, just for those coaches out there that aren't aware, with the Vegas games that'll be happening this season, it's still unlimited trades. So once round 1 kicks off, or round 0 kicks off over in Vegas, you still can trade unlimited throughout your team until the last game kicks off of the regular round 1 season. So you can make adjustments based on what you see over in Vegas, and if someone was to get injured and you think, oh, okay, that was my main hooker or my main 5'8", I'm going to need to now put someone else into that spot. You can make live trades throughout that round as the information starts coming in, and you can adapt to that as well, and I recommend doing that. It's not locked in place after the first game kicks off. But let's talk about trades. So a lot of people out there talk about you must save trades early. You shouldn't use too many trades up in the opening rounds, and then wait until the first price changing round before you make those, or just prior to, just to make the first lot of trades so that you can jump on all those money makers, and then wait till buys come for you using some more trades, and then save a couple of boosts for the end of the season as well. So you look, previously, before we have, as I've said before, this type of strategic season with weekly buys now, I would say the complete opposite. I believe trading hard early is the correct strategy. I don't believe that saving trades early actually is beneficial to your starting position in SuperCoach. I actually think building depth and value in your team is way more important than saving trades early. Does that mean blow every single trade you've got as quickly as you can? Absolutely not. That's not what Coach K is saying. What I'm saying to you is just consider building up the depth and value in your team as soon as possible, particularly to increase player 18 and 19 and even 1 to 17 to get them to premiums as soon as you can. It's a race to the top overall, and also a race to the top of team value and depth in your team. So in saying that, I did, for example, let's give some proof around it. Let's talk about some people that did exceptionally well last season and how they traded. Did they go slowly? Let's save trades. Let's make sure we've got lots of trades for right at the end of the season so we can hope for restings and we can come home strong at the end and hope for mass player resting so we can finally make some jumps and be competitive on this leaderboard. Well, I can tell you now, a lot of coaches that finish off the season up top, and I'm saying top 100, 200, whatever it might be, they actually had a team of 24 players, even some had 25 depth players in their team. So it wasn't like they only had 17 really strong players. They actually had built depth throughout the season as well, even though they blasted through their trades. So yes, having trades at the end is absolutely useful. And ideally you do want to have some, but you don't have to save them right at the start of the season. You can use with some really good buy planning, you can use the middle of the season to be the place where you can save a fair few trades. And then go hard at the start, save through the guts through the middle of the season, back end it with some trades, and you absolutely can dominate. So let's have a look at some people that went really, really well last season, and let's see how they went about business. So give me again 1 second while I pull some information up. All right. So this is back looking at, and again, this is from my Twitter page back at the end of last season, where I was heavily discussing and showing data on all the top coaches and how many trades they had left on my Twitter page. So back on the 23rd of August last year, I made a Twitter post and it was about the top 10 teams overall. So back on the 23rd of August, with a couple of rounds to go, we had 3 teams with no trades left with a couple of rounds to go. We had another 2 teams with just 1 trade. We also had 1 team with a couple of weeks to go that had 5 trades left and they had boosts up their sleeve with 5 trades left. So the obvious question would be, or not question, the obvious, let's see how this unfolds. Is it the teams with no trades left that actually went well, or did that team with 5 trades and boosts up their sleeve absolutely dominate, come home, take out the $50,000 and run away with this competition? Because these are all teams in the top 10. Well, let's look at the final round. Coming into the final round, we all know about Wolfpack. Wolfpack, well, most of us do who are serious super coaches, Wolfpack was pretty much leading for half of the season, if not longer. He was the most dominant team and coach last year. He did exceptionally well. He was still the leader coming into the final round of SuperCoach. And he held that spot for, like I said, nearly all the season, for a fair chunk of that season. And he was the team to catch. It was the team that I was chasing when I was coming 17th overall as well, and trying to work out how to get there. But let's have a look at that. So 1 round to go, we had 5 of the top 10 teams with 1 round to go had no trades. So they didn't go slowly and save trades all the way through to the end. Like some content creators, some coaches out there say you must save trades right through to the end because mass restings happen and you need to have trades. Otherwise, you're not going to win this thing. Again, I disagree. Half of the top 10 of the round to go disagree. Half of the top 10 had no trades left and they were in the top 10. They weren't coming 2, 3, 4,000 position and hoping to for mass restings and to catch up to the top 1,000. These guys are pushing for the 50,000. They had no trades left. I do believe pushing hard the trades early to build depth is really important. So there's that bit of proof. Let's also look at Wolfpack. So Wolfpack, he came in and traded hard. He traded hard at the start, really hard, with his boosts as well. And he ran out of trade with 4 rounds to go. 4 weeks to go, he ran out of trades. Yes, he did drop off on that last round. He got unlucky with the amount of players that were rested and that huge last round resting that we saw. And it was pure luck whether your team got hit harder than others. Even teams like myself that had 24 active, strong players coming into the last round, 2 trades wouldn't have helped me. 3 trades wouldn't have actually helped me that much. I wouldn't still have won even with 3 trades. It was, and we all knew that about what team had the last buy, so we avoided those players and we built a team away from those players, but it still didn't help. So what helped is getting up to the pointy end and also having big depth and keeping in mind with future vision of what teams are going to have the buys over those last few rounds is really important as well. But let's look at, so Wolfpack, who was leading the whole comp for basically the whole season, he traded hard, ran out of trades with 4 weeks to go. But at least he was up the pointy end for the whole season and having a great time up there. And yes, he didn't win the 50 grand, but gosh, he did good. I'm sure all of us would love to have been in that position. It's way more fun. But let's look at the person who did win it. So Daily Telegraph and Tommy Sangster, he put out an article last year where he discussed his interview with the winner. So the winner last year, Wayne Hartis, he created his team. And with his team, I'll read this to you, where, and again, the Daily Telegraph's article, he's got the title of The Secret Tactic. And this is straight from the article. Hartis is a big proponent of going hard on trades. I traded to win, he says. If you drop too far behind, you're gone. I ran out of trades in round 23, when many others had trades up their sleeve still. I only had a couple of trades left after round 20. That was the final buy round. That's from the winner of SuperCoach. And also, I just spoke to you about the Wolfpack, who was leading SuperCoach nearly the whole entire season. He also went hard and ran out of trades in round 4. I'm not advocating running out of trades, not at all. If you can have trades up your sleeve for the final 4 rounds, that is ideal. And I think you need to find places in the middle of the season to do that, but it's not at the start. Now, I actually was the same. So with my team, and I'll explain. So again, I started off 27,000, and then I came into the top 1,000 by round 9, and I was top 100 by round 14, coming 32nd. And this is how I traded. I'll run you through it. The first opportunity to trade was before round 2. I boosted and did 3. The round 3, I boosted again, did another 3, then another 3, then another 3. So I burnt 4 boosts in the first available trade rounds. But what that did, and then after that, I did 2 more the following week. So I've got 1 boost up my sleeve, and I've done a maximum trading almost up until round 6. What that did is we started with 11,436,000 salary cap. But coming into round 7 for me, I had built $3 million worth of value in my team. Now that equates to more than 2 or 3 players, but in real terms, it's most likely 2 or 3 players that I can now upgrade into keepers into my team. Ideally, players 18, 19, and maybe even 17 have been upgraded to really good, strong players. So by the time round 6, round 7 comes, potentially even round 5, I start the upgrading process, I'm playing guns through 1 to 17, 1 to 19. When most teams who have gone slowly are still playing their $250,000, $300,000 centers, and the player 17, player 18 is worth $200,000, $300,000. It makes a big points difference. I'm making leaps and bound improvements in what some of those other coaches are. But I still continue, so I'll go again. So then after those 2 trades, I then did no trades the week after in round 7. Then 3 trades, 2 trades, 2 trades, 2 trades, 2 trades, 3 trades for the first buy round. Then I started saving trades. No trades a week after. And in the middle of the round, I started to save some trades. And that's my advice to you, is potentially look at the middle rounds as places to save trades. But build value as quickly as you can. Get your team absolutely gunning at the start. And then slow down in the middle and then save some for the end run. Even though that's not how Wayne did it, who won it. It's not how Wolfpack did it. And potentially it's not how I did it ideally as well. I ran out of trades with 3 rounds to go. So I had trades up my sleeve all the way into the last final 3 rounds. But by that stage, I had a team of 25 absolute guns I was happy to play. Well, besides Sonny Luke, who I think might have been my 25th player. So you can get there, build your squad up with heaps of depth, and then trade as hard as you can early, and then just sit back and make sure you've structured with foresight into who those teams are, with good runs and buys later on, and then make sure you've got the right sort of players for the run home, and you can get there and do that. And that's exactly how Wolfpack, Wayne, and it's how I did it as well. Many other teams, as I said to you before, in the top 10 did it the same way, running out of trades weeks before the season finished, and they're still up there winning tracksuits, winning cash, and having a great time in SuperCoach because they're up the pointy end. Anyway, that's enough about that. That's trades. You definitely can go slowly, in summary. You definitely can. And I'm not saying don't do it, because like I said to you before, I'm open-minded about all this stuff. If you want to save trades and go slowly, go ahead and do that. It's absolutely fine. People have won it prior to this more strategic SuperCoach style of game that we've got now. People have won it previously doing that. So I'm not anti it. It definitely can work. And you can hope that people run out of trades and they've chosen the wrong players, and you can hope for mass restings, and that can be your strategy. I would rather be in control of my destiny, build my own squad, not rely on restings, not rely on hoping that the top 1,000 get it wrong and I can come home with a wet sail. I want to be the guy at the top or close to the top pushing. And if it's not me, I want one of you guys listening to this to do it. Because let me say to this as well, this is really important. I was talking to someone earlier on today about this as well. When it comes to SuperCoach and a preseason team, if you take nothing from this podcast, take this. When it comes to building a preseason team, it's really, really important that you remember you don't have to create the perfect team for round one. What you ideally have to do is just create a solid team. Sometimes boring is best for these round one teams. What I mean by that is you don't need to get absolutely every decision correct. But what you do want to do is put a team out there that is going to have as little fires as possible to put out. You ideally want a team where you don't need to make too many of your early trades just to fix your team up, as opposed to making strategic trades to jump your team forward, if that makes sense. So if you choose the wrong, there's so many mid-second row forwards. Let's discuss that. You can't have them all, and you're probably going to choose some of the wrong ones. That's okay, but just know that. So just choose, how many do I want to have in my team? I'm going to take an educated guess at which ones I think will be the ones that you should have. And if you get it wrong, it's okay. If you get it wrong, then make the changes come week 1, 2, whatever it may be, 3 if it's got someone that's on a buy early. Just make those trades, make those changes. That's easy to do because you can go sideways and pick up those guys. But don't stress about which one to choose too much. Choose the one that you think is right and just be happy with that. But what you don't want to do is have a lot of changes that are going to be required early in the rounds. So just pick a well-structured, well-balanced team that is just going to be solid. And then we can make the moves that we need to do. Because let's look at this. I was discussing this earlier on today with some coaches. And that is, it's not your preseason team that is going to determine your overall position at the end of the season. It's not. It's absolutely not. What will determine your overall position is 100 other reasons. And let me explain what those 100 reasons are. You have 54 vice captain and captain choices to make over a season. That is really important. You have about 46 trades that you're going to be making, including boosts, over the whole season. So that's 100 decisions. You've got 100 really important decisions to make over this season. Forgetting about making the right decisions on which players to bring in, which is another factor element to it. Just forgetting about that for the moment. But you're going to have 100 decisions there to make that are way more important than the preseason team that you're coming up with. You can get a great preseason team, but absolutely muck up all your vice captains, and all your trade choices, and you're going to not be featuring in the overall leaderboard. But vice versa, you can come up with a very mid-boring, solid copper team, but make great 100 decisions on those areas, and absolutely blast up the leaderboard. So don't worry, don't stress too much about your preseason team. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be solid. That's all. Okay. Now that we've discussed that, major and mini buy rounds are definitely the place that you want to make big jumps. So once again, follow this podcast, like and subscribe, get on my Twitter page. I'm going to be giving lots of help and information when we get close to the buys about how to navigate through that and how to make those big jumps. No different to what I did. I absolutely blasted through those buy rounds and flew up the leaderboard. And like I said, it came out the end of the buys in 17th spot. So I want to help you guys as well. So jump on and like and subscribe. I'm going to give you help as that comes closer. Final thing. Final tip I'm going to give you regarding strategy, and it's not going to help you this season, but it'll help you in 2025. That is, and I do this every single year I play SuperCoach. Write down after round 1 finishes this season. So after round 1 finishes, write down all the key learnings that you got from how you created your preseason team. What did you learn from that? What would you have done differently? What do you think are the rules now that you want to put in place for next season? Write it down while it's fresh. Just put it in your phone, write it on a bit of paper, wherever you want, and then you can refer back to it at the start of next season. I've got my little Bible of information that I write down over the years of, okay, you must start with this and you really should have that. And just strategically speaking, how I'm structuring a team. So what I'm explaining to you today and on the previous podcast about structure and strategy is coming from years of experience of playing, but adapted to the current type of game that we have right now, which is very different to what I've had previously. But there's no better time than after round one, when it's fresh in your mind, write down what worked, what didn't work, and what you would do differently next season. And I'm not talking about particular players' names, I'm talking about strategy and structure. Okay, that's enough from me about strategy, structure, and going into depth in those certain details. One thing I didn't touch on with the cheap hooker, pardon that, cheap hooker, well, I did touch on it, but I just want to say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to take small risks like that. If it doesn't work, some people say, well, you're then screwed if your cheap hooker strategy doesn't work. Well, not really. You're probably going to use some of that money to upgrade and get a gun center wing in, and that might mean that you might have to then sacrifice that gun center wing. But guess what? After round 1 or 2, you're going to also know who the ideal $400,000, $300,000 center is that's got a massive negative break even that you can downgrade to, make a lot of value out and get a lot of good points from. And with that cash saved, upgrade your hooker back to a Grant or a JMK or whoever's going really good up there and after their buys as well. So you can skip their buys up in the hooker position and then you can jump on them and downgrade your gun center wing. Yes, it costs you 2 trades, but I honestly don't stress about that. 2 trades, and trades are important, but you've got opportunities to save trades. Get your team right. Have a go if you want to have a go at that strategy. You can always fix it. People talk like you can't fix up your team, but you absolutely can fix it. So don't be stressed about that kind of gear. All right, enough of all that. Let's talk about some of the Twitter questions that I received. First of all, massive thank you to everyone out there that wrote in and tweeted some questions and wanted some answers on things that were bothering them in their particular teams. First question that I've received, and it's asking, the hooker position can be played a few ways. What is optimal? Is it a gun and a cheapie, a gun, or is it mids? Is it 2 mids? Look, I think I've touched on hooker a fair bit today. If you want to know optimal strategy, I actually think the optimal outcome here is you have a gun and you have a cheapie. That's probably the optimal strategy. But it's very hard to achieve that goal this season at the moment, I believe, and have a well-balanced, structured side elsewhere in your team. You're going to have to go without somewhere. 5'8" centers, we touched on that. I don't think 2 mids is the way to go, personally, from a... only because this season I don't really see the options there that are going to make you the money. I think either double cheapie or a gun and a cheapie is the way to go. Who am I looking at? If we're talking about guns, I mentioned it before, Harry Grant, JMK, and Robson. They're probably the 3 that I would consider. Next question, what's the optimal strategy for second row forward? A lot of coaches are going through mid strategy with no second row forward over 500K to allow for funds elsewhere, such as the depth at second row forward. 100%, that is pretty much all I'm seeing everywhere is just a bunch of mid-ranges. But you can't have them all, and you can't have, what have we got, 3, 6 mid second row forwards out there, because it's going to take up too much value in your team elsewhere, and you're going to have some problems elsewhere in your team. So I'd say choose 4, potentially 5 mid second row forwards if that's the strategy you want to go with, and be ready to change them over in round 2 or so when you see that they're not getting the minutes you thought, their role is different to what you expected, and then jump on the one that is. It won't be all of them. They won't all go great. They won't all turn into 60 averaging second row forwards. So the goal there is just choose who you think and be ready to make the switch. Optimal strategy, I don't think starting with a gun second row forward is the way to go this season, whereas I do like that normally. But with this season, based on the fact that our salary cap is getting spread so thin, because last season we had Nico Hines go down injured with a calf injury in preseason, that freed up a lot of money. So in our teams last season, we could spend a bit more money in certain positions. At this stage of the season, pre-trials, we don't have an injury to a key player. Thank goodness. I don't want injuries on anyone. However, because of that, we don't have that huge amount of money to splash through the rest of our team. So you do need to save some money somewhere. That's my thoughts on the second row forward. Another question. I'm noticing a very high percentage of teams are very similar. Obviously, we need to wait till Team List Tuesday for cheapie confirmations, etc. So how do you strategize your team and be different but not fall behind? Great question. My answer to that's really simple. You don't need to have a pod team to start off with. I kind of touched on it before. Having a boring, solid team is the way to go preseason. You will have the chance to bring in pods all throughout the season. if you do want a strategy that I think is a pod strategy that I'm not seeing many people go with, and I'm not about choosing pod players as such, but it's pod strategy, and that would be maybe load up a bit more in the centre wing department and a little bit weaker in other areas, because there's most people are going really light on in centre wing, and it would be a pod move to load up a bit more in the centre wing area, and with guys that are actually going to score you 40, 50, 60 and above scores, while everyone else is getting 20 to 30 scores by a couple of their players, and potentially even relying on a 18th player who might be a centre wing as well, when other players are on buys. So the teams are looking very similar, and there's a few factors for that. One of those is that we're seeing a lot of team reveals by a lot of prominent people in the community, and then therefore a lot of people copying that strategy of how they've laid out their team, and we're seeing a lot of teams looking very similar. But that's always going to happen. That's SuperCoach, and without us content creators, a lot of people wouldn't even play this game. So that's just the game. But I do believe you can look for pod strategies more than pod players to start off the season, but you need to have a balanced team. Another question. Let's get to that one. How would you structure a cheap hooker squad? Where would you capitalise and spread the funds? First thoughts, this would allow Nathan Cleary and a semi-gun centre like a Carraz, or maybe even a mid front row forward like a Flegler to a Max King or a Cotter. Okay, great question. If you did have a cheap hooker squad, how do you use those funds best? My answer to that is, first of all, you don't have to do this cheap hooker strategy. You definitely can go with your gun and a cheapie. And there's definitely a place for that. And I think there'll be some well-balanced teams in doing that, but they're going to have to save somewhere else in that squad. But if you are going to do it, you will need to ensure that you maximize your 17 point scorers, particularly your 1 to 17 players. They do need to be maximized, maybe even your 18th player, depending on how many early buy round players that you have. But you will need to make sure that you impact on 1, potentially 2 or 3 of your 17 starters, because we're looking for potentially a 30 to 40 point gain plus is what we're looking for here in our average by using that $400,000 with a cheap hooker strategy. So where to from there? Well, we can go consistency and upgrade a front row forward to get the consistency, like a Payne Haas or other, who doesn't have an early buy, and we can definitely get a average point increase there through that one position upgrading. But that is one strategy. The other option would be going centre wings. So looking at where your weakest spots are in your team, and can we strengthen those? Where a lot of other teams, strategically speaking, might also be weak. So can we strengthen an area in our team that's weak, where we know other coaches will be weak, and come out of that with a win? And again, we're aiming here for an average of 30 points or more gain because we're dropping down that amount by going not from Grant down to, let's say, the Parramatta hooker. So definitely, I think it's what you've suggested is fantastic. Going to Carraz, going to you're hearing at the moment a lot of hype over Hammer. But there's other players too, and I was listening to the SC Hub podcast just the other day with the guys there going through the centre wings, and they had some really good chat about some pod plays there, but also some really good options in the centre wing department. So if you haven't checked out those guys in SC Hub, definitely jump on over there. I produced a 5/8 chat over there as well, going into the strategies on the 5/8, so that's worth a look and listen to as well, and those 5/8 options. But with this, definitely want to look at things like the centre, where we can upgrade 1 or 2 of our centres to maybe a high 3s to mid 400s, potentially from a $250,000 centre wing that you might have. And also you possibly could look at then upgrading one of your mid-topper centres up to a gun. Now, most people won't have that set up. Most people will have one gun or one 600-ish thousand, like a Carraz or a Hammer or someone in that range. They might even look at having a Crichton or someone in that range around that 600-ish price. And then they'll have mainly just cheapies from there. They might have Talon May, 400-ish thousand player, and then just cheapies. And that's a pretty common look that I'm seeing at the moment. Potentially even some teams just with Talon May as being their highest, or someone else around that 400 Laybutt from the Cowboys, and then just having cheapies from there as well. So that's a point of difference you can get, and definitely an average increase. So if you're looking at someone like if you're starting at the moment, someone like a Bostock or Iro, who potentially might not even get a starting gig. But if you're looking at one of those type of guys, and they're looking at maybe, realistically speaking, forget what SuperCoach says as far as projected score, but just what you think is realistic, maybe a 20 or 30 point score from there on average over the first few rounds. And we can jump that up to a base score, let's say with a Mazu of 50 to 60 in scored without tries. And then we add the tries and try assists and so forth on there as well. And we got a huge potential for way more than a 30-point increase. You'll get 30 points just in base, let alone the upside as well. So, and that's just upgrading one player. You may be able to upgrade more than one, even with that fund. And I'm not saying Marju plus getting a Valentine Holmes, the 400k would stretch that far, but you definitely could look at upgrading maybe then from a $200,000 hooker to maybe getting up to a Jesse Arthurs or someone else around that kind of price range where we'll get another average increase out of that position. It also might be the difference between going with, say, a Weeks and going up to a Flanagan or Flanagan up to maybe a Trindle or whatever it might be. So you might be able to make that slight increase there as well. But what we want to do is mathematically, you just want to go and have a look at the averages and what you suspect they will be averaging. Look at the history there of their 80-minute games, if that's what they're playing. Definitely centre wings, we're only looking at 80-minute playing options. But look at that and see whether we can get a 40-plus average across a couple of players to increase the strength of our 1 to 17, 1 to 18 is where we want to increase. Hope that answers the question, but it's a great question. Moving on to the next question. So next question I have here, are there too many mouths to feed in the Roosters pack for any of them to be actually viable options? Great question. I see people are pretty much asking that question online in a lot of different places. And there's a lot of podcasts that are talking about it as well. So my 2 cents worth of that is, and some people have asked me as well if I'm keen on Wong and Crichton and so forth. My answer to that is, and Terrell May's another one. My answer to that is basically, at this stage, I'm not interested. I'm just not interested because there's too many unknown factors. Until I get more answers, my interest will then potentially increase or decrease. But at the moment, I'm just not interested in them until we get more information. There are so many mid-second row forwards in particular that you can get your hands on that have a little bit more certainty around their role, whose potential upside is as good as some of the guys that we've just mentioned in the Roosters. So I'm looking more at those guys than I am at the Roosters until I get the answers, or that's even if we get the answers. I want to know if Crichton's starting, if he's playing he gets that role. Are we talking about Wong getting the role? Are we talking about reduced minutes, 80-minute roles? What are we getting? Hopefully the trials will give us some answers there. Terrell May as well. How many minutes is he actually going to get? There's a lot of different reports out there about minutes for these guys, and until we can get some kind of certainty around that, I'm more likely to go elsewhere than there. But like I said early in this podcast, I am happy and willing to be flexible and ready to make that jump come around 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it might be, onto the right rooster once I've got the information. So if I don't get it pre-season, I probably will avoid. But what I'll do is I'll be ready to make the jump before price rises if one of them definitely gets the 80-minute roll, or if Terrell May gets some great minutes and keeps his PPM at a huge rate than what it was previously. If he can do that, or Crichton gets an edge roll for 80 minutes or close to, then look, they all of a sudden come into my team. You don't have to start with everyone perfect. You can be willing to make the jumps, especially those mid guys. They're pretty easy to make the jump to. It's just a sideways move. But that's where, strategically speaking, structuring your team, don't start with the most bottom price second row forwards that you can. You do want some of them that are at the top end, so it's easy to go down 10, 20 grand, but sometimes it can be hard to go up 20, 30 grand, whatever it might be, just to that next one. So a Pia Cora up to a Firma, for example. If you don't have those funds, it might be hard to make that sideways move. But if you started with hypothetically Firma, I'm not saying to do it because he has an early buy, but you may or may not wish to. But if you do start with a Firma, it's easier to go from Firma down to Pia Cora or down to one of those guys, a Crichton, let's say. I'm not going to go into on this what people to choose and which roosters to go with. Like I said, my decision there would be just wait until we get more information. And there's plenty of podcasts out there if you want to go into analysis of players. And there's some fantastic podcasts out there for literally breaking down averages over the years. Shout out to Armin Talk SuperCoach as well. He's got some fantastic stats. I really enjoy his podcast too. So if you're not liking his gear, get in there and like and subscribe to him. He's got some fantastic stats on a lot of different players. And also who are the top 20 ranking players over the years in each position. So how many times at each position, rank in the top 20 of averaging players. So some really good stats there. So shout out to Armin for that as well. All right, let's move on. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, let's move on. One of the other questions that came in, I've got 2 examples of this and then we'll finish up. I had a couple of teams sent to me and some people wanted some advice on some teams. They sent those through on my Twitter page. So I just want to touch on those. I'll just see if I can put this up on the screen behind me. One moment. Let's see if this works. I just want to touch on their teams because they're two different type of teams. So let's have a look at them if I can get this up. So first of all, the question is, I changed a few things structurally after listening to your podcast. Great information, by the way. So thanks for that. I'm not sure whether you're talking about my structure one and strategy podcast or my 5-8 one or my hooker one, but thank you anyway. And I'm guessing it's probably the structure one that I released because there were a few people that got in touch with me explaining how they've changed their teams and they've really appreciated that type of strategy information. But this person's concerns are that JMK's early buy and not having an elite centre to start. Hopefully they can find cash to make this happen though, maybe by downgrading Payne Haas if another decent mid arises. Would love your thoughts. Okay, so let's have a look at the team. I'll put this on the screen behind me. I'm not sure if you can see that at home. I might even get out of your way so you can see that better. Let me move out of the way. All right. So right here, you'll see up top, we've got Jeremy Marshall-King and Hands as the hookers. That's a really good combo. That's like one of those combos we spoke about. So that's speaking about doing the gun hooker with obviously your cheapy hooker here in Hands. The 80-minute hooker is obviously a good option if that's what he becomes. It could be Lussick, and potentially come round one, it might also be none of them. It could be a bench hooker. He might. There may be a change of mind there as well. So wait and see. But I don't mind the hooker setup at all. Even though I've been talking about cheapy hookers, I'm also a fan of gun and cheapy. Payne Haas, Max King, wow, power. Powerful front row. And we spoke about this before as well. So this is a good example. Someone putting in there particularly one standout gun, one gun front row forward who you're maximising your cap value from because he doesn't have a buy till later on. We know what he can do and we know how he performs. We know that he absolutely will be the centerpiece or the rock of your team, giving you regular high scores. Maybe he doesn't have the ceiling of some of the other positions, but great person to have in there. You got Max King. Look, definitely an option. There's a few guys that could be, Cotter, and a few others that could be. But speaking of Cotter, you've got him there sitting on your bench. Obviously, he'll be in your 17 starting players, so whether he's on the bench or on the field, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. But you've got Cotter there as well. I see what you've done here. We move on down to your second row, and we'll see down here, that you've got Beau Firma, and we've got Sean Lane as well. So Beau Firma and Sean Lane, very popular combo there. And look, the mids aren't really that important. They are important, but they're not that important for this article anyway on who you've chosen, because there's so many you could choose from. You've also got Pia Cora and you've got Curran on the bench. So they're your four mids that you've gone with: Firma, Lane, Pia Cora, and Curran. I'm not going to say whether or not I agree with all those. There's heaps of other podcasts out there you can listen to determine that. But as far as the structure is concerned, I like it. Four mids, of whichever mids you believe. Obviously, the Firma one has an early buy, so that's a slight concern because that means you're going to be playing in round 2 your player number 18 in your team. Unless when we go down further, there's any more Titans players, because if there's any more Titans players, you're going to be playing 18 and 19 in your team. So, but forgetting about the particular players you've chosen right now, I like it. What you've also done here, I see, is you've chosen Miles Martin. Miles Martin, look, I know why you've done that for, because he's a dual. And you've gone for the dual there so you can utilise Ruben Cotter. So you can bring Ruben Cotter down to the second row. So when Firma's on a bye, you're actually probably going to throw him in there, so you haven't got to play Martin or Egan in your team. So I see what you've done. The only thing I would say there is possibly the reason why you've done that is Cotter is because you're worried about Firma's bye. So my thought there would be possibly start with someone different so that you're not putting 542,000 on your bench there. I would either bring Cotter in for Firma if that's what you want to do, then you can downgrade after the Firma has a bye, or you can make a sideways switch if you wanted to as well. But because I see what's happening down the bottom of your team too, and you're needing some funds elsewhere, and maybe that's where you can find some of these funds. But we'll move on down. So we'll go to the next page, look at the rest of your team. We'll zoom in on that. All right. So here you've got Nathan Cleary, Mitchell Moses. Absolutely. That's a pretty popular combo that I've seen. Obviously, Cleary and Hines is probably the most popular and ideal setup, but we can't have them all. So you've saved money in bringing Moses in. I don't have too much of an issue with it. If you can't afford Hines, then Moses is one of a few options there that aren't a bad option. Ideally, though, Hines would be a better option, but you've got a gun hooker, so it's probably costing you two gun halfbacks. No dramas. This obviously was sent to me before the news about Jaden Campbell, But at the moment, you've got Campbell and Flanagan there in your 5'8s. So Campbell and Flanagan, no dramas. Campbell and Flanagan, or Campbell and a cheap 5'8 was a semi-popular combination that I saw some teams doing. And like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, that is one of the ways that you can save money. And some people save money. Rather than going a cheapy hooker, they're going a mid 5'8 and a cheapy 5'8. So similar risks, like I mentioned before, about Campbell and Brimson, and what happens if that doesn't work out early rounds. There's every chance that maybe that gets switched back and Brimson goes back to fullback, and we've got issues in your team there as well. Like you might have at hooker, if you go the cheapy hookerish setup, you might have those issues too. So it's not without risk. But now Campbell potentially may not start round one. We'll have to wait to hear on that. But if he doesn't, you're going to need to find someone else there that can step into that role. Now, that's going to be a bit harder in that mid-range. I don't like a lot of the mid-range options, to be honest, that are available to us. So that's something that you're going to need to think about, how you're going to find the funds there to either upgrade to like a Munster or a Brown, if that's the way you want to go. That's a pretty big jump as well, money-wise, to go up to that area. So that's going to be a hard one to make. But I guess at this stage, just sit tight and wait and see what the news is with Campbell. Maybe have a bit of a play and get some teams going without Campbell in it to see, so you kind of can be flexible if the news comes through that he doesn't start. I'm not a big fan of putting $456,000 on the bench and stashing him away until he does start. It's just too much money of your cap that you're not getting points for early doors. When we've discussed that before, you want to get off to a good start. So if he does start though, I don't mind it. If he doesn't start, I wouldn't have him in there. Looking at wings and centres, I see you've gone here, you've gone Sevo, you've gone Taylor and May, we've got Bostock and Burbo in there. Now looking at your bench centres as well, Strange, Iro, Stewart, so you're probably the four you got there, the four you're most likely going to probably start with. Sevo, May, Bostock and Burbo. So what has having a gun hooker cost you? It's cost you probably a gun 5'8", a second gun halfback and a gun centre. Now, that's what I was talking about earlier on. This is how having a gun hooker or and you've got Payne Haas as well. So you're going to put guns in your team and other positions. I'm guessing once we get to it, you've probably got two great fullback options, two guns. It's going to cost you somewhere, and that's okay. Everyone is the same. You're not alone. Don't think you're alone. Everyone is in the same position. So you've gone a little bit cheaper in those spots. Let's look at that. Sevo, I actually released an article on my page a couple of weeks ago on Sevo. Let me see whether I can pull it up for you now. One moment. Mako Sevo. All right. Something interesting here. So this is the article I put on my page a little while ago. And I was like, who am I? But basically the key things here I'm wanting to show is Sevo, he had a 48 average in 2023 when he was missing two key players. That being Dylan Brown and Lane. Once those two key players returned, Dylan Brown and Lane, he had a 73 average. He also has no early bye. The first 7 matches, he only plays one team who statistically last year were a hard team to score SuperCoach points against. Out of the first 7 matches, only one of them are statistically a hard SuperCoach scoring team. He's a left winger, as we all know. Now, I've had a look at the stats on the teams he plays over the first 7 rounds, and I've had a look at how many tries do they let into left wingers. So he's got one team they have let in 11 tries, 8, 15, 13, 14, 15, and 8 tries conceded down that to the left wingers. So I see why you've put Sevo in there. There is a chance that he starts off pretty well. I'm not saying to go and get Sevo. I'm not here to try and hype him up so everyone jumps on him and then I cop all the abuse when he doesn't go well and he gets a 20 or 30 average. But I did just wanted to, I can see why you maybe have put Sevo into your team. There is merit to that. There's a bit of thought behind it, and I'm not against the idea of doing that. So back to your team again. So you've got Sevo and you've got Taylor May. Again, Sevo, no early bye, which is nice. Bostock will have an early bye. That's a slight issue because, again, we're looking at player 18 in your team, whoever that might be for you. So these are things to consider. You don't really have Strange might be a backup option there for you or might even be a playable option for you. Won't know again until we see trials and team lists. But I don't mind it. You've got 2 mids and 2 cheapies in there in your 17, or in your 4 centre wings. I think a lot of teams are going to have to go that way. I actually think your squad looks pretty well balanced, but I can see where you've had to save the money, obviously, and you have to. Fullbacks, you've got 2 guns. Turbo, Ponga, Look, there's so many options. It's incredible. Fullback this year is incredible. I love those two. They're really solid options. But Turbo quite easily could have been Drinkwater, could easily have been Latrell Mitchell. I know a lot of people are going for Pappenhausen, probably more money reasons and value reasons than anything else. But that's a wait and watch for me, Pappenhausen, until we see trials and see how he looks, basically. And then make sure he's kicking goals as well, which likely he is. But I love those options. So basically, you've got a two-gun fullback, and you've got two mids, two cheapies in the centre wings. You've gone for a one-gun halfback and Mitchell Moses, so a semi-gun, and you've gone for a mid and a cheapie in your 5'8". Look, not bad. And you've gone for a gun in your hooker and a really solid front row. So that's a solid team. I actually quite like it. Not a huge amount of feedback I can give you, but possibly you could save some money in that second row position / front row in your bench where you've got Cotter, and you could spend some of those funds potentially in your 5'8" position to upgrade now that Campbell might be in doubt, or potentially spread it through your centre wings. But I like it. It's a great team. Next one. Next question I have here is just wanting your thoughts on my team. I'm pretty content with it, but what do you think? Here we go. So this is a different team. Let's have a look at this one. All right. So zooming in on this, this is the double cheapie hooker setup. Now this isn't my team. This has been sent to me by one of my followers on Twitter, but it's worthwhile actually discussing it and having a look at it, because there's a few things to look at and talk about in here that discuss around what people are doing with that money. So you've got here the popular cheapie combo of Brayley and Hands, or Brayley and Lussick, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be Brayley starting. He could be on the bench, and it could be Hands as your starting hooker, or Lussick, whatever it might be. We'll wait till we get information on that regarding trials and team lists, and we can make a more educated decision. But hopefully you only would be wanting to play one of those hookers, cheapie hookers, not two of them. First of all, that's important to note. So just because you've got two cheapie hookers doesn't mean you should be playing both of them or want to be playing both of them. You're ideally only playing one. So I've discussed in detail the cheapie hooker setup, so I don't need to go over that again. You also have gone for Ruben Cotter and Totola in the front row with a strong bench of Palacia and Hughes. So two popular options there. I like the setup there. You've got people that are on super early buys. You've got a dual in Cotter. So that's a good option. Second row forwards. Let's have a look at that. So in your second row forwards, we have Wong, you've got Sean Lane and Blore and Curran on the bench. So you've gone for a 4 mid option. So keeping in mind, this is a double cheap hooker strategy. So let's see where the cash gets spent. At the moment, you've got a solid front row, probably not as good as the other team who had Payne Haas and Max King. You've gone Cotter and Totola in the front row. So you've saved also a little bit more money there, and you've probably lowered your averages in that position as well. But in the second row forward, you've done what the other team did too, and that is you've put in 4 mids. I'm not going to go into whether I like those mids or not. One thing I will mention is there's no real super early buys in there, which is good. So you're not going to need to be playing one of your bench second row forwards, which is also why you haven't had to throw in another expensive forward as a dual onto your front row forward team like the other team we looked at did. So I like it. It's a good setup. It's a popular setup. And you've got Tallis Duncan and Fafita, the leisure dual right there as well. So you can shift Cotter down if you needed to, and you could put Palacia into the front row if need be as well to cover any issues. So there's a little bit of flexibility built into that. I don't like the fact that Fafita's every chance of not really playing many minutes this season, and therefore probably going to be someone that's going to be a plotter in your team that potentially doesn't make much money at all, and is going to be an issue when we're trying to build depth and we're trying to build value to get that depth. So we want to maximize every position in our team if we can. But moving down to see what you've done in the halfbacks, there we go. So here's the first instance where we're seeing the money get spent. So that money we saved in hooker, you've got the Hines Cleary combo. Now, I'm not saying Moses can't start great. He absolutely can, and he's a good option, a solid option. Cleary is a scary option though. Yes, he has Penrith have a tough start to the season. Not an easy start anyway. But it's Cleary we're talking about. Cleary can go big against anyone. He absolutely can. And based on one of my golden rules of putting into your team those that can hurt you is really important. You don't want to be behind the 8 ball if you can help it. So a Hines can hurt you, a Cleary can hurt you, a Ponga can hurt you. They all can really go big. Particularly as well, they're all goal kickers as well. So these goal kicking guns absolutely can hurt you. They rack up 40 points against the team, and they kick all the goals, plus they are involved in tries, try assists, line breaks, they absolutely can go 130, 140, 180 plus, and they've done it. So having these guns in these positions is a safety measure, and I like it. I like it if you can afford it, but it's hard to afford it if you're putting in gun front row forward or gun hookers, gun fullbacks, gun halfbacks, gun 5/8s. You've got to save money somewhere. But here's the chippy hooker strategy, and as you can see there on the screen, Hines and Cleary has allowed you to go those two options. Let's look at your 5/8. Okay, I'm changing the picture. 5/8, we'll zoom in on that. All right. So in your 5/8 position, yeah, okay. I see what you've done here as well. So in your 5/8 position, we've got Dylan Brown. So you've gone another gun, a gun that the other team we looked at couldn't quite afford. And you've backed it up with Jaden Campbell, not a cheapie in your 5/8. So someone who's quite playable, barring obviously injury and playing round one, someone that's very playable in your 17. So you've gone strong in the 5/8 too. That is a result of that cheap hooker strategy we discussed. That frees up the cash to go gun in those key positions, the halfbacks and the 5/8s, fullbacks. It allows you to really do some damage points-wise and average-wise there. You've lost some average points in your hooker, your 30 that we spoke about, 30 to 40, but you're picking it up in your halfbacks, your 5/8s, as well as having some strength through other positions as well. You're not really overly weak anywhere or super weak anywhere else that we've seen so far. So Jaden Campbell, if he doesn't start round one, you're going to have to make a choice there what you do, who you go to. Potentially, I'd say you're going to go down in options and save some money there as well, which you'll be able to put elsewhere in your team. But I like it. It's a gun halfback 5/8 combos. Moving down to your wing centres, looking at your wing and centres, we've got Talamay, Arthurs, Bronson, and Bostock. So, look, popular options. I've seen them in so many teams. I'm not going to say anything too bad about them because they're a common combo. The only thing I will mention is that there's no real gun in there. And saving money on the hooker position, I would like to see that one of them is more around that, at least one of them is around that 600 plus range, just to truly maximize your average. Now, you might be able to afford to do some of that depending on who you downgrade Jaden Campbell in your 5/8 position to, if you have to downgrade him. You could downgrade him and upgrade someone else. But what that will do potentially is it might weaken your 17 starting positions because at the moment you'd be starting Jaden Campbell. So if you brought a cheapie in for him, you're potentially not starting the cheapie like Weeks or someone else. But you'd need to have a look at that. But ideally, I'd like to see that you try to increase one of those cheaper centre wings, and Arthur's, Cherry or Bostock, up to a more of a gun if we can. So have a look at that. That's my advice for you, is try and increase that. But I love it. I love what you've done. I love the fact that you've been able to spend money through some of those key positions. Well, let's have a look at your fullback to see what you've done there. So in your fullback position, you've got two guns there as well. Same guns as the last team we looked at. Ponga and Turbo. Very popular gun options. Again, Turbo quite easily could have been a multitude of other options. I'm not anti all those as well. I'm not going to go into that in this podcast anyway about which fullbacks I prefer over others, but two gun fullbacks is what you've chosen, and that's brilliant. And none of them are Pappenhausen, which I like as well. The fact that you've gone for a true outright gun, until we see what Pappenhausen looks like this season with regards to coming back from his injury and how he looks, how agile he is. Is he the Pappenhausen of old? Now, you've gone for that safer option at this stage of Turbo. And if he looks great in trials, Pappenhausen, you obviously can downgrade, save a couple of $100,000 there, and you've got even more upgrade money to spread throughout your centre wings or other positions in your team, maybe your front row. But I like it. It's a solid team. What I would suggest, though, is that do have a play with a gun hooker strategy as well, or a solid hooker strategy. Have a look, see what you can create with that. But I like your thought. There's some smarts behind this team with regards to duels up front row, although I don't like the fact you've got potentially a front row there not playing minutes and therefore not creating value in your team. But as a basis of a team, I like it. All right, let me come back in. So basically, that really wraps up this podcast. This was really to explain to you about some of my thoughts around strategy. It's been a long one, but there's a lot to discuss when it comes to strategy, and I've tried to cover a lot of different things: teams, viewer questions, and go in depth in certain areas of the of strategy and how to set up your team. I really hope you got something from it, and I want to say, if you've listened this far or watched this far into the podcast, thank you so much. I really hope you've got some true value out of this podcast. I spent a lot of time to do research and give you guys the content and expertise around strategy that I've built up over many years, not just playing SuperCoach, but like I said before, my poker brain and how that works, and I've tried to bring that into SuperCoach. So I really hope you got something from this. All I'd ask, if you love it, can you please leave me some comments, letting me know what you loved about it, and give us a like, give us a 5-star rating too on YouTube if you can, and Spotify. Jump on my Twitter, give us a like on there and a subscribe. It really means a lot to me, and it means a lot to my ability to be able to continue producing these podcasts for you throughout the season. So that's it for SuperCoach Cropped. Thank you for joining me, and I will be talking to you soon. Good luck out there.